One of the greatest obstacles to crafting health and wellness is identifying and controlling inflammation. It's at the core of all complex and chronic diseases. And it's the driving mechanism that underlies the most common symptoms that people like you struggle to overcome. Join us as we explore cutting-edge science and research to give you the information and tools you need to create the quality of life you want and deserve. And now, here is the host of Inflammation Nation, Dr. Stephen Noseworthy.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. We're in this mini-series where we're talking about miracle molecules, and we started with nitric oxide, and I did a 3-part series on how incredibly important it is to have not just adequate levels of nitric oxide, but to have control of how that is being produced through dietary factors as well as specific enzymes that are found in your brain, your immune cells, and your blood vessels. And go back and listen to that if you missed it. Today we're going to go to the next miracle molecule, the second miracle molecule, and that is glutathione. And I know that I've talked about glutathione on the podcast before in different contexts, and maybe you've heard of it somewhere. I'm not the only person talking about how useful it is to have adequate glutathione levels. So what I want to do is I want to cover the basics first, give you kind of a bird's eye view of what glutathione is and what it does. But as a reminder, and to connect this discussion back to the last one, I mentioned in the segments of nitric oxide that it has a very, very short half-life. But I also mentioned that glutathione can connect to nitric oxide and extend its half-life from a few seconds to a couple of hours. And this allows nitric oxide produced in one area of the body to circulate to another one and have its effect in a different place than where it was produced. And by that standard, nitric oxide functions as a hormone, really essentially no different than your thyroid hormones or cortisol or insulin, for example. Now, first and foremost, glutathione is best known as an antioxidant, but it also plays key roles in detoxification of the liver, as well as handling specific toxins that actually don't get processed by your liver. And that is maybe a distinction that not a lot of people are making. So we're going to tackle these one at a time, and then we'll talk about how you can get direct access to the same tests that I use with my personal coaching clients. We'll come back to that a little bit later. But let's talk about what glutathione is at a molecular level. Let's start with the very, very big picture. And essentially, glutathione is a tripeptide. And what that means is that it's a very short molecule, or let's call it a short protein made up of 3 amino acids, which are cysteine, glycine, and glutamine, or you may see or hear people refer to the third one as glutamic acid. Now, if you have a background in biochemistry, don't crucify me on the details. Like, I know that proteins are longer than peptides, and technically proteins are made up of 50 or more amino acids. We're just talking about 3, so it's a peptide, not a protein. But I might use the word protein or perhaps refer to glutathione as a protein-like substance. But again, don't crucify me on the details. So glutathione has these 3 different amino acids, and we have enzymes in our bodies that take these amino acids, which we get from our diet, of course, and connects them together to make glutathione. And if we look inside our cells, because essentially this is where we want glutathione to end up and to do most of its work, if we look inside the cell, about 85% of the intracellular glutathione is contained in the cytosol. That's the general space, the general interior part of the cell. And in that interior part of the cell, we have other things like organelles like the mitochondria. So about 85% is in that open space, that general space, and about 15% is inside the mitochondria. Now, interestingly, while the cell in the cytoplasm does have enzymes to make glutathione, the mitochondria don't. And so the amount of, or the glutathione content of the mitochondria is derived specifically from glutathione that's made inside the cell and then transferred into the mitochondria or imported into the mitochondria. Because again, the mitochondria themselves cannot make glutathione. And glutathione is pretty much made by all cells, but it's made in varying amounts. So certain cells and certain organs will make more than others, and unique in all of them is the liver. And in fact, the liver makes most of the glutathione we have in our system, and it uses glutathione for its own cellular protection, also to participate in one aspect of liver detoxification. But the liver also stores and releases glutathione that can then transport through the body and be used by other cells. And in fact, if we ask the question about if we look inside the cell and see how much glutathione there is at an intracellular level, most of the glutathione that's there was initially made by the liver and then transported into the cell. So ignoring that for a moment, I think it's important to know that glutathione in its native form, where these three amino acids are already connected together, can't get into the cell simply on its own. There has to be a transport mechanism that allows that. And so again, ignoring for the moment that the liver makes, stores, and releases most of your glutathione, we need a way to get that glutathione made by the liver into the cell, right? And the only way we can do that is by disassembling glutathione into its three individual amino acids, and then shifting those amino acids into your cell, where enzymes in the cell's cytoplasm then can reassemble the glutathione, or I should say the amino acids that make up glutathione. So the liver makes it, transports it out into the peripheral body, but because glutathione can't get into your cells easily, we have an enzyme that breaks it down into the three amino acids. And then those amino acids go into the cell and get reassembled by another enzyme inside the cell itself. And here's where we can look at labs. Like there's two ways that we can get a handle on what your glutathione levels are. One is to do direct lab measurement. And by all means, that's the gold standard, measuring things directly. But there is a laboratory marker that can be used as an indirect marker, and that is a test called GGT. Now, I have taught blood chemistry analysis in postdoctoral seminars for about 16 years now. And we talk about GGT all the time. And we often talk about it, or I should say the context in which we usually talk about GGT as being a marker for gallbladder disease or gallbladder dysfunction. But what I want you to know about GGT as a lab test is that, number one, most doctors only run it if they think you have a gallbladder issue, or maybe they run it if they think you might be an alcoholic. So it's not part of routine laboratory analysis when it probably should be. And second, GGT is described in the medical literature as a marker for glutathione sufficiency. And again, it's not the same as measuring glutathione directly in the blood and comparing the proportions of what's called the reduced and oxidized forms, which is important. We'll talk about that later. But as a quick screening tool, GGT is a simple and inexpensive way to get an idea as to whether or not you have an increased need for glutathione. And third and finally, GGT is also described in the medical literature as an indicator of morbidity and mortality. Now, it doesn't mean if your GGT is high, you're going to die. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean if GGT is high, you're going to get a disease or you have a disease. Just these are associations, not causations. But nevertheless, depending on your GGT level, we can get an idea of whether or not you have active medical issues or health issues that are affecting your quality of life, and at worst, might predict your mortality. And that's an entirely different discussion, right? But suffice it to say right now that, number one, you should be testing your GGT levels, or your doctor should be. And you want your GGT levels to be in the bottom fourth of the laboratory range. You just look at whatever the lab range is, and this is pretty standard from lab to lab. May not be entirely the same from one lab to the next, but they'll be pretty close. You want to be in the bottom quarter of that laboratory range. The higher GGT is within the lab range, the more likely it is that you have active metabolic issues that require more glutathione, and higher GGT may indicate that your glutathione levels are insufficient to handle the toxin load and the oxidative stress of whatever is going on with you and your health. So next time when you get your labs done, ask your doctor to run GGT. And if he or she won't play nice, you can always use the link in my lab shop. GGT is always part of my routine lab analysis. I understand how important it is. I look at this in every single one of my clients, and I typically run this on every single lab. So back to how we make glutathione. First and foremost, adequate protein intake in your diet is absolutely critical, because that's where we get the raw materials to make glutathione. And if we recognize that the liver makes, stores, and exports glutathione for other organs and other cells to use, we quickly get a picture that the liver's role in whole body glutathione balance is critical. And in fact, research says that the liver controls your systemic glutathione balance, which has implications for how our toxic burden can tax not only the liver, but literally every cell in your body. Essentially, your liver takes these 3 amino acids, cysteine, glutamate or glutamine, and glycine, and uses this enzyme system to repackage them into glutathione. And again, that gets exported to your bloodstream, floats around as a stable molecule that resists degradation. And when it encounters a cell that needs more glutathione than it already has, the glutathione gets broken down into its 3 constituent amino acids by this enzyme called GGT. And GGT sits on your cell membrane of all your cells, but it also lives inside the cell in that general open space called the cytosol. The mitochondria don't have it, but the cytosol does, and the cell membrane does. Now, once glutathione is broken down into its amino acids, they get transported individually into your cells where enzymes reassemble it on demand. And if your cells have plenty of glutathione, it won't do that as much. If it's running at a deficit, it will do it more. And so how do your cells do that? Well, when there's a mismatch between the level of toxin load and oxidative stress that you have, when there's a mismatch and the levels of glutathione needed to quench that goes up, this mismatch signals the cell to make more GGT, which then increases the rate of breakdown of glutathione in the blood so that it can take the amino acids into the cell and then turn it back into glutathione. It's actually a very elegant system. Now, here's another little tidbit. Remember that I said that glutathione can connect to nitric oxide and extend its half-life. Well, it turns out that GGT can also break the bond, releasing both glutathione and nitric oxide so that cells can get the benefit of both of those molecules at the same time. Another reason why knowing your GGT level is incredibly important. That means better blood flow, better tissue oxygenation, better brain signaling, improved immune responses, and so on. And so really, again, what we're talking about here is the function of glutathione as a signaling molecule, just like nitric oxide, and as an intracellular antioxidant. Now, remember, an antioxidant is something that can donate one of its own electrons to prevent a free radical from causing tissue damage through this thing called oxidative stress. And when it comes to antioxidants, glutathione is the Mac Daddy of them all, right? Not necessarily because it has special characteristics that other antioxidants don't have, although antioxidants actually are graded as to their potency and some are stronger than others. Rather, the main reason why glutathione is such a powerful ally in health and in cellular protection and metabolism is because it's so abundant inside the cell under normal healthy conditions. In fact, it's present in your cells in roughly the same concentration as other critical things like glucose or potassium and even cholesterol. So once inside the cell, once in the cytoplasm, glutathione can then, once it's been reassembled, can interact with toxins and free radicals and control them. It can also handle the oxidative stress from the free radicals that are being produced by your mitochondria as they make energy or ATP. And you may have heard me say in the past that the number one source of free radicals being produced in our body is actually from our mitochondria as our body is going through normal biochemistry. We make we make free radicals or oxidants as a natural course of being alive. But we have to be able to control that. One of the main reasons or ways that we do that is through glutathione. Now, on top of all this, glutathione can easily enter the outer membrane of the mitochondria itself, and it gets transported completely intact to the inner core of the mitochondria. So getting glutathione into the mitochondria is easy, but getting glutathione from the bloodstream into the cell is a little bit more difficult. So in the big picture, there is this constant flow and flux from the amino acids from the protein in your diet to the production of glutathione in your liver, and how that controls the level of glutathione in your bloodstream, to how the toxins and oxidative stress load that your cells are experiencing increases or decreases the level of GGT so that you can tune up or tune down the amount of glutathione that gets inside your cells. And once inside your cells, there is a flow of glutathione into and out of your mitochondria, all designed to protect your cells from damage in an effort to support and preserve function. Now, let me hit one more concept because it's clear I think I need to split this topic into a couple of different episodes. One of the greatest features of this entire glutathione system is that once you've used glutathione to stop a free radical or to neutralize a toxin, it's not lost forever. It's not like, and forgive the analogy, but it's not like a bullet where you fire the bullet and you can't fire that same bullet again. It's not like a match. Maybe that's a better example. It's not like a match where once you strike it and use it to light a candle, you can never use that match again, unless you light it from a second match, obviously, but you can't use it as an original match. Glutathione actually has a recycling system that allows your cells to take glutathione that has been expended, that has already donated one of its electrons, sacrificing itself for your well-being, and to reconstitute it so that you can use it again. And it's just one more reason why glutathione sufficiency is so critical, and another reason why glutathione is what I call a miracle molecule. So how does this glutathione recycling work? Well, let's start with this. Your total pool of glutathione, what we call total glutathione, obviously, it's made up of both glutathione that is ready to be used and glutathione that has already been used and can be recycled and used again. So let's say all of the matches that you have in your matchbook is made up of the matches that you can use to light a fire and matches that you've already used to light a fire because they've been spent and used. When you're healthy, more than 98% of the glutathione you have in your body is in this ready-to-use form. And that means that less than 2%, or let's say 2% or less, is in the already used form that can be potentially recycled. And this recycling capacity adds to the total that you have. So our cells can run into issues with glutathione in a couple of different ways. Number one, your total glutathione levels can be too low, which might come from low production. And we might see that in someone who has like a low protein diet. We might see low total glutathione because we've had acute depletion or even chronic depletion of glutathione from a toxin load, where you use up more glutathione than you can make and recycle. Or you can have normal total glutathione, but for some reason can't recycle it efficiently, such that even though your total number is fine, you have too much that you've already used that you can't recycle and reuse again. And once again, this recycling system is run by enzymes that essentially take two different spent glutathione molecules, essentially stitches them back together, and then breaks them apart so that you now have two glutathione molecules that are ready to go. It's a truly amazing system. So let me leave it there for the moment. We'll still have to talk about the roles of glutathione beyond its core role as your major intracellular antioxidant, and that is its role in detoxification and chelation, as well as a critical role as a protector and healer of things like leaky gut and leaky brain, and we'll talk about its role as a potent supporter of immune balance and control. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll do all that the next time right here on the Inflammation Nation podcast.
Thanks for listening to Inflammation Nation. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. Be the first to know when a new episode drops so you can stay on top of your game. It also helps others like you find the answers they need. You can use the links in the episode description to check out Dr. Noseworthy's self-learning programs for thyroid, detox, and gut health. Or you can submit a question for the podcast and even reach out to Dr. Noseworthy directly.